Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The plane hummed softly on the tarmac, ready to leave New York for Los Angeles. In the cabin, passengers were preparing for takeoff, some reading, others gazing distractedly out the window. In row 12, Marcus Johnson, a charismatic 38-year-old pilot, black, impeccably dressed, and exuding confidence, calmly awaited his departure. He had just finished a long conference on aviation safety and was eager to join his family for a much-anticipated weekend. Beside him, a woman in her 50s, elegant but visibly haughty, cast suspicious glances at Marcus. When he was about to sit down next to her, she sat up abruptly, staring at him with icy coldness. "I prefer to sit somewhere else," she said curtly, without giving any explanation. Marcus was momentarily speechless, taken aback by such behavior, before understanding. Discrimination, subtle yet undeniable, hung in the air of the pressurized cabin. The passengers around them murmured, some shocked, others embarrassed, as the tension became palpable. What the woman didn't know at all was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just a pilot. He owned one of the most influential airlines in the country, a man respected and admired worldwide for his success, intelligence, and determination. The humiliation she thought she was inflicting would backfire in the most unexpected way. In the heavy silence, Marcus took a deep breath. His patience and composure were about to be tested, but the story that followed would surpass all the arrogant woman's expectations. Marcus finally settled into his seat, remaining calm despite the tension. The woman, named Evelyn Whitmore, her face frozen with rigidity and prejudice, crossed her arms and looked away contemptuously. Marcus observed the other passengers, some cast furtive glances, clearly uncomfortable, others feigned indifference. A few minutes after takeoff, Evelyn leaned slightly toward the flight attendant to whisper something. Marcus overheard a few words. "I don't want to sit next to him, it's unacceptable." The flight attendant, visibly embarrassed, nodded shyly and offered to swap seats. Evelyn accepted with a satisfied smile, as if she had won a small victory. Marcus took a deep breath, reflecting on everything he had accomplished to get where he was. A pilot for over 15 years, he had survived a sometimes hostile professional environment, climbed the ranks with skill and determination, and even founded his own airline, Sky Empire Airlines, which had just achieved record revenue. But despite all this, he found himself facing a woman who judged his worth solely on the color of his skin. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus noticed Evelyn pretending to read a magazine, but her eyes regularly scanned him, filled with contempt. At that precise moment, a small smile played on Marcus's lips. He knew that the power she thought she possessed was an illusion. A few moments later, an announcement rang out in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, we remind you that the pilot of this flight is Marcus Johnson." The flight attendant's voice was clear, professional, and deliberately respectful. Evelyn looked up, confused, trying to understand. A murmur spread through the cabin. The passengers were realizing that Marcus wasn't just a pilot, but the owner and founder of Sky Empire Airlines. Faces around her turned, some with admiration, others with disbelief. Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. The person she had judged solely on the color of her skin was, in reality, the one who held the power over her life on that plane. The feeling of humiliation that had seemed distant just minutes before now materialized with overwhelming intensity. Marcus, ever calm, looked at her with icy gentleness. He didn't utter a word, letting the situation speak for itself. The plane continued its flight, but the balance of power had just shifted, and Evelyn understood that she had just exposed herself to a lesson she would never forget. The murmur spread throughout the cabin like a light but powerful wind. The passengers, now aware of Marcus's true identity, exchanged intrigued glances, some stealing looks at Evelyn, who was growing paler and paler. Sensing the opportune moment, Marcus slowly rose from his seat, each movement measured, imbued with calm and authority. The eyes of all the passengers turned towards him. Evelyn tried to look away, but her body betrayed her anxiety. "Mrs. Whitmore," said Marcus, his voice calm but firm. "I understand you have your preferences, but it seems you've judged someone without knowing who they really are." Evelyn remained frozen, unable to reply. A few passengers murmured amongst themselves, some clearly expressing their disapproval of the woman's behavior. The flight attendant, visibly relieved that Marcus had intervened, nodded silently, letting the scene unfold naturally. "You refuse to sit next to me because of the color of my skin," Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on her with a quiet but penetrating intensity. "An attitude that has no place here, nor in the world I'm trying to build." Evelyn, trembling, stammered a few words. I didn't know." But her voice was lost in the oppressive silence that filled the cabin. Marcus approached slightly, not threateningly, but with an undeniable presence. "Madam, it's important to understand that prejudice has a cost. Sometimes that cost is invisible, sometimes it's immediate." At that moment, he made a subtle gesture towards the crew. The flight attendant, with a discreet but knowing smile, took out her notebook and announced, "For everyone's safety and the comfort of all our passengers, we are going to rearrange the seats. Ms. Whitmore, I suggest you sit at the back, by the window." Evelyn, her cheeks red with shame and her voice trembling, could only agree. The passengers applauded discreetly, some even laughing softly, satisfied that the situation was being resolved with dignity and authority. Marcus returned to his seat, calm and majestic. The lesson was clear: true power lies not in fear or arrogance, but in self-control, competence, and justice. Evelyn Whitmore, who had thought she had asserted her superiority, had just discovered that she had humiliated herself before an entire audience, powerless in the face of the truth. As the plane continued its flight, Marcus looked out the window, his mind already on the family waiting for him in Los Angeles. But he knew that this flight would remain etched in the memory of all those who had witnessed this confrontation, a reminder that respect and dignity are non-negotiable, and that arrogance melts in the face of truth. The plane was flying through the clouds, but the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Evelyn Whitmore, sitting by the rear window, was desperately trying to make herself invisible. Every passenger around her cast malicious or sympathetic glances at Marcus, as if to underscore the magnitude of his mistake. Marcus, from his seat in the front, calmly observed the scene. He knew the situation could be transformed into a stronger, more unforgettable lesson, not only for Evelyn, but for all the witnesses. He called the flight attendant over the intercom. "Please ask the passengers if anyone would like to share their experience or ask a question about flight safety." A curious silence fell, then timidly, several passengers raised their hands. Marcus invited the first to speak. A young woman, smiling, recounted how she had been inspired by Marcus's career and how his story encouraged her to pursue her dreams despite the obstacles. Evelyn, increasingly uncomfortable, tried to shrink back in her seat, but the stares around her were merciless. Marcus, still calm, then said, "Ms. Whitmore, I think it's important that you understand that respect and dignity aren't measured by your social standing or personal preferences. They're shown in how you treat others." The heavy silence was suddenly broken by a general murmur. Several passengers began talking about Evelyn amongst themselves, sharing their disapproval of her behavior. Some whispered, "She didn't know who he was." Or, "What arrogance." Evelyn felt her shame become unbearable. She tried to answer, to justify herself, but her voice trembled, her words eluded her. The crew, discreet but complicit, ensured she remained in full view of everyone, while Marcus continued to maintain his sovereign composure. To conclude the lesson, Marcus stood up again and declared, in a strong but calm voice, "In life, we all encounter moments when our prejudices betray us. Today, you have had the opportunity to see that judging someone on their appearance or skin color is not only unfair, but can cost you your dignity." Applause erupted throughout the cabin, applause for Marcus, for the lesson taught, but also for justice restored. Evelyn, red with shame, lowered her eyes, aware that her arrogance had just cost her much more than a few minutes of discomfort. She had just lost face in front of all the witnesses present. Marcus returned to his seat, smiling slightly. The situation, although delicate at first, had turned into a powerful example for everyone. Respect is not begged for, it is earned, and true authority is demonstrated by self-control and dignity, never by fear or arrogance. The plane began its descent towards Los Angeles. The tension in the cabin had given way to an almost solemn atmosphere. The passengers, inspired by Marcus's calm and authority, chatted amongst themselves, admiring the way he had handled a delicate situation with composure and dignity. Evelyn Whitmore, still seated by the window, could no longer avoid the stares of others. Every discreet smile, every admiring comment about Marcus reminded her of her shame. She felt a crushing weight on her shoulders, the feeling of humiliation had reached its peak. Marcus, aware that the moment was perfect to conclude the lesson, stood up for one last announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing throughout the cabin, "today we witnessed something more than just a robbery. We saw that respect and dignity are non-negotiable, and that judging someone without knowing them can backfire." Then, turning subtly to Evelyn, "Ms. Whitmore, I hope this experience has given you pause to reflect on your attitudes and prejudices. In life, every choice we make has consequences, visible or invisible." Evelyn lowered her eyes, unable to reply, but the warmth of the stares around her made it clear that she had just been publicly corrected, tactfully and intelligently. The passengers' approving murmurs turned into outright applause as the plane finally touched down in Los Angeles. Upon exiting the aircraft, Marcus approached the cabin crew and thanked them for their professionalism and discretion. Evelyn, on the other hand, was left alone with her conscience. Lesson learned, utter humiliation, and above all, the certainty that she would never again judge someone based on her own prejudices. A few hours later, as Marcus was reunited with his family, he smiled inwardly. Life had a subtle way of reminding everyone of their place and their behavior. Today, he had transformed an act of arrogance and discrimination into a memorable lesson, without ever losing his dignity or composure. This theft would remain etched in the minds of all those who witnessed the situation, a reminder that true power lies not in arrogance, but in competence, patience, and justice. And for Evelyn Whitmore, it was a lesson she would never forget, a cruel but necessary reminder that ignorance and hatred never triumph over truth and self-control.